So I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds to see if anybody jumps on here. So we'll get started in a second here. Just going to see if I can link over to Instagram as well so that everyone's getting all of this. Anyway, I've got actually just got out of a meeting that was pretty cool, pretty exciting. So I'll make that announcement in a second. Just give me a minute. All right, we'll see how that goes. All right, so hopefully that is working on Instagram now. So it's been a while since I've done one of these live videos. As you can see in my background there, it's changed quite a bit. I'm coming to you live from essentially a construction zone. Basically what we're doing is we are renovating our basement. So back here, where is it? Back here, like in behind there, we're actually building an office for myself. So I'll be back in there eventually when it's done. And then just beyond these sort of beams here and like towards me, I guess that way, we're going to build kind of a walk-in closet. And then the rest of the space is essentially going to be a bedroom. And then that way is going to be kind of a seating area, then hopefully a bathroom. And then into the back corner, we're going to have kind of the laundry room and all that. So we're basically just building a kind of a master suite in our bedroom. So that's why it looks the way it does. But it's going to be really nice in the future. We're pretty excited about it. The other thing that has changed in the last little while is I actually just got back from a vacation. So I was in BC for a while there, visiting my family, visiting some friends. Had a great opportunity to roll with some of my jiu-jitsu brothers. It was really great. A huge thank you to all of you who showed up and let me roll with you. And a huge thank you to Sir, who actually kind of put it all together and made it all possible. It was a really interesting experience because since the shutdown and all that, I actually hadn't had a chance to get back on the mats. So it was really great to be back on the mats and kind of roll with my friends and whatnot. And it was really interesting because, that first day, it was really just like knocking off the cobwebs and like I was terrible. Right. And then the second day was a little bit different, gained a little bit of confidence, kind of like reintroduced myself to my body and how it was moving. And then by the third day, it was I had a lot more confidence and I was able to get quite a bit better and kind of get back to close to where I was. So that was a lot of fun. It was a really interesting experience over the course of those 3 days. And then we were We were on the island as well, so I was visiting my parents. We had a few things to kind of take care of. My grandmother had passed away prior to the shutdown, and we hadn't really had much closure on that, so we got a chance to do that. And then, of course, I think the biggest takeaway from this vacation for me was I could remember myself as a kid and my parents talking about how they wanted to retire and where they wanted to retire, and they wanted to retire on the island for sure, and then they were hoping that ideally they'd have a house with a nice view of the ocean and whatnot. And I gotta tell you, like, the place they got is absolutely amazing. You wake up, you've got nothing but windows on one side of the house, and you can stare out at the ocean. You can go get your coffee, sit on the deck, and watch the whales and seals and everything. Just it's just a wonderful ocean view. So it was really motivating, and it was, for me, I'm always inspired by people who can set long-term goals and actually accomplish them. And that's really what inspired me over that weekend, was seeing that, back in, it was probably like the early 90s, my parents had this idea of where they wanted to be when they retired, and they actually achieved that. So that was pretty incredible to see. Now, I'm just going to set up a couple of things here. So we're going to do a bit of a Q&A based on some of the messages I've got from clients. And I'm going to do my best to answer those questions as well. So that. And I'm just going to kind of copy and paste in the questions that I've gotten. So I think what we'll do is just kind of get right into it here. So the first question I got was, I'd like to be able to do a pull-up. What's the best way to get the strength to do that? So there's a lot of sort of common approaches out there. One of them being to get up on the pull-up bar and have one of those elastic bands tied to the pull-up bar, and then you try to scoop it around your knee or around your foot. And that's a great way to get started trying to master the pull-up. And the idea is that you'd use a smaller or less resistance band until eventually you have the strength to actually just pull yourself up. And then that way you would accomplish your first pull-up sort of thing. But something that I think is overlooked in kind of the strength and conditioning community is using the lat pull down. Now, this is an opportunity where I think it's an easy exercise for clients to use to accomplish. Like, it can be difficult to kind of get up on a bench or something and try to scoop your knee under that, under the band and whatnot. That can be quite challenging. You do have to have a certain level of strength to actually pull the resistance band down as well and actually get it kind of hooked around your legs or your feet or whatever it is you're doing. Some gyms do have an assisted pull-up machine that can help, because then you stick the pin at the, maybe it's the very bottom of the weight stack, and then you just keep moving the pin up the stronger you get, and eventually you won't need to use the assistance at all. But one thing that's overlooked is the lat pull-down machine. You can actually just set that bar up, set the weight to whatever you can manage, and just start pulling that thing down. And that can be a very easy way to build up the strength to get your first pull-up. So I would definitely consider that if you're trying to do that, trying to get that first pull-up. If you're trying to increase the amount of reps you're doing on a pull-up, you can kind of do the same thing. Like, maybe you want to do as many pull-ups as you can and then move over to an assisted pull-up machine, or kind of superset with the lat pull down. So basically it's kind of like drop setting your pull-ups. So you do, like if you could do 2 pull-ups, you do your 2 pull-ups and then move over to the lat pull down and finish off with like a set of 8 at a lower weight. Next question. So next question is, I've lost 20 pounds and I like the way I look. I'd like to stay around that weight. Is my calorie total too much if I keep it to small meals? So one thing to understand is that the size of your meals shouldn't indicate your total caloric intake. So if you're eating, 2,000 calories a day, it shouldn't really matter how many small meals you have, as long as you're not going over whatever the caloric restriction is on your meal plan. The other thing to think about when it comes to creating your meals, there's sort of some interesting studies. I don't know if I'd really call them studies. They're more like social experiments with involving caloric restriction. There's a few where they measured the amount of peanut butter somebody ate using a tablespoon. It tended to measure at least 1.5 to 2 times more than what an actual tablespoon was. So using an actual measurement tool, not a spoon out of the cupboard, could help. The other thing that's interesting is there's some studies on the size of plate that you use. So if you're using a large size plate, you tend to fill the plate with a lot more food. So it's quite easy to overeat if you're using larger plates. So using a smaller plate can help. And the other thing that's interesting is when you finish, don't go back for seconds. So once you've consumed everything on the plate, just count that as, that's the end of the meal. There's kind of a funny experiment where they did, I think it was in Italy, they had people with bowls of soup, and in some of the bowls they attached like a hose to the bottom of it, and they just keep pumping soup into the bowls. And so these people would be eating their soup and they'd get close to the bottom, and then it would sort of fill up again with more soup. And what they found was that the people who are in front of these bowls that sort of kept refilling themselves, they just kept eating. They just keep eating over and over, and they consume like bowls and bowls and bowls of soup until they couldn't eat any more soup. I think it was impossible to eat anymore. So, giving yourself some sort of restriction on how much you're going to eat is definitely a good idea. Next question is, I would like to do a photo shoot. What should I do for my diet? Okay, I'm just going to pop this one in there. Oop. Okay, so I'd like to do a photo shoot. What should I do for my diet? Well, that sort of depends on how much time you're going to give yourself. If you're doing a photo shoot in 2 weeks, there's really not much you can do. Maybe you can do a few sort of tricks like manage your water and that kind of thing, but minimum, I'd say what you'd need to do is give yourself 4 to 6 weeks to get ready for a photo shoot, minimum. And then with your diet, if you're trying to lose weight and kind of look a little bit more full, you're going to want to create a caloric deficit kind of going towards as you get closer to the photo shoot, like maybe subtract about 200 calories out of your diet every week, maybe a little bit more depending on how far you'd like to go. The other thing with this strategy is kind of a disclaimer, is that this isn't designed to keep you at a weight. It's designed to make you look decent for the photo shoot. So you're gonna end up rebounding and putting whatever weight is lost back on. But if it's just a matter of improving a little bit of your aesthetics, what we can do is, there's some common ideas where you sort of limit the amount of water you intake, maybe 2 to 3 days before a photo shoot. Maybe you're eating a little bit less protein and that kind of thing, but it really depends on how lean you get. Like when we were doing the bodybuilding stuff, we had to be really cautious with what we were eating, because eating a little bit too much protein at what were we, like less than 3% body fat, maybe lower, you could really have a detrimental result. And if you watch any of those bodybuilding competitions, you can kind of look through the difference between like a morning show and an evening show, or if it's a 2-day show, day 1 and day 2, and you can really see the difference between what one person ate versus what somebody else ate. I don't know what that is. Anyway, so one thing you should do, if you want to make some improvements towards a photo shoot, is just kind of limit the amount of calories you're eating, and then the day of the shoot, you're going to sort of limit your water intake, and then make sure that you're getting enough calories in after the shoot as well. So the next question here is, what is the best diet for IBS? So I should kind of give you a disclaimer here that I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian. I am a strength and conditioning coach, and there's a lot of overlap in those categories. But much like you probably wouldn't ask a dietitian for a workout plan, you probably shouldn't ask your strength and conditioning coach for a diet either. However, I have taken a ton of, I think I've done about 3 or 4 certifications in nutrition, and it was a major component in my my studies at college and whatnot. So I do have some background in it. I'm not too familiar with IBS in a sense where I could really prescribe what the best diet would be for that. However, one thing about IBS is they really don't understand what they, as in like the people who study this thing, they don't understand what the root cause of irritable bowel syndrome is, but it seems to be linked to stress. So you may want to take an audit of your diet and just make sure that it's balanced. First and foremost. If there's still some symptoms of IBS, you may want to look at how you're managing stress. Now, this can get into a bit of a vicious cycle, because one of the ways people manage stress is they consume their calories, in which case we can kind of, if you're stressed out, you're going to increase the likelihood of having IBS symptoms. And then if you're going to eat sort of comfort food, it may have a negative effect as well. So you kind of get the double whammy there. There is an idea of something called food maps out there, which I've spent a little bit of time kind of reading about, largely because I do have some clients who suffer from this. And the idea behind food maps is kind of limiting I think it's carbohydrates or vegetables that don't digest properly, and then they get stuck in your intestine and kind of just rot away down there. And that's sort of what contributes to a lot of the symptoms of IBS. That's sort of the idea behind food maps. It seems to have some success for some people, but really, I think one of the issues with IBS is just trying to figure out what's going to work best for you. So what I've done with definitely one of my clients, one of the other ones, the food maps thing kind of worked. But with one of the other ones, it was literally just, let's grab a blank journal, write down everything you're eating, and then we will sort of weed out what causes you problems. So, we'd have a list of foods that she ate, and, we would kind of gauge how she felt after each meal or how she felt during the day with those foods. And it was just kind of kind of touch and go. It was kind of play it by ear. So not the best solution, but eventually we did get to a point where we figured out what food she could manage. So we stuck to those and didn't go too far off the beaten path. And, it seemed to help for a long period of time. But stress is a major one as well. So having some idea of how to manage your stress is going to be extremely helpful as well. All right, next question here is, should I be going to exhaustion on my sets of AMRAP push-ups? Well, the short answer is yes. AMRAP, for those who don't know, stands for as many reps as possible. Now, the nice thing about push-ups is it's kind of a self-limiting exercise, meaning you're going to stop doing push-ups. There's a very high likely that you'll stop doing push-ups long before you ever get hurt. And yeah, I do think you should go to exhaustion. Now, what that means is it's how many reps you can do sort of in sequence. So if you're pausing for, something like more than 2 to 3 seconds per rep, then you're probably done. Meaning, you're doing your push-ups, you're going, and then you pause and it's like 1, 2, okay, you're done. Like that should be the end of the set. And then you can try to beat that next time. But so that's kind of straightforward answer there. And the next question, let's see if this won't fit. So how do I get back my motivation for the gym? I'm the last of the group that started. It's just not the same doing the workout single. The small group held me accountable. So with this question, this is an interesting one, and I definitely sympathize with it as well, because there's sort of two things built into this. But I completely understand this because, like I just talked about my jiu-jitsu experience here, one of the things that I've had trouble finding is actually some people to roll with out here in Saskatoon who kind of can commit to 2 to 3 times a week, 1-hour sessions. It would be a no cost sort of situation, but I'm having trouble finding somebody who I can sort of trust to roll with, who's going to, who's at least on the same page as me regarding the limitations with the pandemic and whatnot. And then finding an area to actually do the rolling as well is difficult because, at the gym where I'm at, we definitely can't do it because of the social distancing protocols and whatnot. And we're sort of, everybody's outside of everybody else's bubble. So I definitely can sympathize with this question. Like I said, this one kind of breaks down into 2 parts. So the first part of that I'll address is the motivation. So in order to get motivation back, now, here's sort of what they teach you in personal training school is there's basically these phases that somebody goes through. So the first one is this idea of pre-contemplation, where essentially you're sort of blissfully going throughout life without really realizing that there's some sort of problem that needs to be fixed about yourself. That's sort of the pre-contemplation phase or something like that. And then the next phase is a sort of contemplation phase where something happens and then you decide, I need to make a change. So this is probably about where you're at. You need to get that motivation back to go to the gym. So, you sort of decide, well, I should probably go to the gym. Maybe I should hire somebody. And then you kind of get into a bit more of an action phase where you're actually looking at gym memberships, or you're thinking about hiring a trainer and kind of gathering some information. And then eventually you sort of take that step and you do hire a trainer, you do get your gym membership or whatever it is. And then you sort of progress into like something like a maintenance phase where we're just sort of reinforcing the good habits and creating this sort of lifestyle change. And it's important to understand with that sort of framing of psychology, that you can drop in and out of each phase and bounce from one phase to the next. So you could go from maintenance to like pre-contemplation, or you could go from maintenance to action, or action to pre, you can bounce around that sort of system quite a bit. But with motivation, what I found now, you can kind of take this two ways. One, you can sort of look for motivation and kind of drum it up inside of you. Maybe, you're watching some sort of video that inspires you to work out. There's probably millions of them on YouTube, or some sort of content that inspires you to go to the gym. Like, back in the day, people would like watch pumping iron, and that would inspire them to go to the gym, or they'd watch a couple minutes of Arnold working out and like, I got to get to the gym. But reality, you can probably do that a few times, but that's not going to be long standing. That's not going to be something that lasts for you. When it comes to motivation, I think it's far more important to figure out what the purpose of going to the gym is. So maybe, since you want to get back, you want to get your motivation back, you may want to kind of sit down with yourself and decide why you started going to the gym in the first place, and kind of hash that out. And that can be a difficult conversation. Now, again, back in something like personal training school, we would say, well, what is your goal? And so hypothetically, maybe the goal is to lose weight. Maybe you lost, the 10 pounds, and then you're like, okay, I want to get those 10 pounds back off. Maybe you gain them back, and you want to kind of go back and get back to where you were. So the greater motivation would be, kind of a savvy trainer would ask you, well, why do you want to lose the weight in the beginning? And there's, several reasons for that. Maybe, again, we're just going to kind of hypothetically go through this. So maybe it's like, well, I'd like to look good, in the summertime. Okay. And we kind of hash that out. And so why do you want to look good? Why do you want to, we kind of keep digging a little bit deeper. Now, most people would probably stop there. They would say, okay, so I've got their goal, or I've got, their need is that they want to lose weight. Their goal would be that they want to lose 10 pounds, right? That's your measurable goal there, or your smart measurable goal. And then the reason why would be to look good in front of your friends. But something that I work with more so with my clients is we try to go even deeper than that. So we really get down, right? Like, remember that my mission here is that I want to help people live a more fulfilling life through health and fitness, and not just create these sort of superficial glossing over of goals and needs and whatnot. So we would get a little bit deeper, like, why do you want to look good on the beach? And, you could end up with a conversation where it's, well, I want to impress my friends, or I want to attract, a mate or something like that. And then, all right, let's hash that out a little bit. What is it about, gaining your friends' admiration that, why are you seeking that? And so we might get a little bit further into it, and we really kind of get down into the nitty-gritty kind of psychological aspects of why you really want to lose weight. And if we can get there, then we can actually find your purpose. And now we're gonna not so much rely on motivation to go to the gym, but you've got a purpose to go to the gym. And so, to answer that motivation question, I would say, find your purpose. As much as that's an easy statement to say, is a far more difficult thing to actually achieve. Just seeing if there's any comments there. But yeah, find your purpose. Find out, really try to figure out why you want to be there in the first place. So now the second part is really not that the first part's not tricky, but this part's really tricky. So you're part of a group of people who are training, and I guess maybe the group has moved on to other avenues. Maybe they found a different gym, or they're working out at home. These are all really common things that happened over the course of the pandemic, and especially the shutdown. People realized that, you could get the same results at home with a solid program that you could at the gym. Now, one of the reasons people go to the gym is because of that social aspect. I mean, that was one of the reasons that I enjoyed going to the gym, because, you'd see your friends and whatnot, and you kind of get that social aspect. And so in this question, so this sort of second part, the word that really stands out to me is accountable, right? Now, in my in-service training, I relied a lot on that sort of power of that group dynamic because, yeah, it really makes you feel like you have to be accountable to be there. You and, 4, 2, 3, whatever, one other person have decided that, hey, we're going to be at the gym at this time. I don't want to let those people down. And when you move out of that situation, so now all of a sudden you're working out on your own, it can be a lot harder to get to the gym. There's millions of excuses that could go through your head as why you don't want to go. Maybe you don't feel comfortable. Maybe it's intimidating. I was reading some research yesterday, the day before, that, oh God, I'm going to forget the numbers, but a very, very high, like something like 70% of people who go to the gym find it intimidating. Now, I think it was like 40%. 40% of the people find it intimidating. And of those 40, half of them find it extremely intimidating. So of all the people who find the gym intimidating, half of them find it extremely intimidating. I mean, they don't want to go. Now, that to me is really interesting because one of our jobs as associates at the gym is to make the gym process or the gym experience. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. So make that gym experience welcoming. So having things like friendly staff and that kind of thing is something that fitness companies really work on. Now, that doesn't really help you that much. So let's talk about accountability. So one thing you might want to do is see if you can find another group. That's sort of the easy answer. Now, then you're going to go through this process of some of those insecurities kind of flaring up as you introduce yourself to new people, or you kind of look to find other people to work out with. And that can be kind of another problem. But something that might work, and this is something that I'm trying to do actually with the jiu-jitsu stuff, is just to find one person. Now, maybe it's a family member. That's kind of ruled out for me, being that my girlfriend is pregnant. So it could be a family member who would like to work out with you. It could be a friend or a close work colleague or something like that. Now, I know where this question came from, and I know that none of those answers are going to help, but the accountability issue, I mean, that might be something as well where you can really just lean on your trainer. So if one of my clients were having issues with accountability, I would want them to contact me, and then we would set up a plan. So what I would do with a client like this is, being that I work, this is one of the things you're really going to struggle with remote training as well, especially as a trainer, is trying to figure out how you can create that accountability when somebody is, working at a gym that could be, miles, if not, provinces away from you. What I would suggest is to set up a plan and make a commitment, and then have your trainer or have somebody hold you accountable to that. So they need to follow up with you. If you missed a workout, why did you miss that workout? What was the reason for it? Maybe you just didn't want to go. Maybe you're still having some anxiety about going to the gym, which is extremely common right now, in which case we don't have an accountability problem, right? We have a kind of social anxiety problem. So there's some things that kind of flush out there, but motivation, generally find a purpose and move forward from there. In terms of accountability, clearly holding yourself accountable may not help, may not work, but maybe you can find a family member who can keep you accountable. And it could be something as simple as, did you work out today? Or did you go to the gym today? Or you can contact your trainer and be like, I need help with the accountability. I want you to really be on me and make sure I'm getting in for my sessions and whatnot. And then, of course, doing the actual workouts in and of themselves, where you're lacking that social connection, that's going to be pretty difficult to figure out. But that's where maybe you need to find, that one other person that you can work out with or have that sort of rapport. Or maybe if you're not even working out together, just somebody who can work out at the same time. So hopefully that helps. But we'll move on to the next question here. Which is, I noticed that the daily Clerk target doesn't match with the amount that you changed in the app. So this is just sort of one of the limitations of using technology to communicate with clients. Sometimes caloric targets or like caloric output, those sort of things don't line up. And it's just because of how the apps have been created. And, maybe in one app, like say in MyFitnessPal, they've said that a large egg is like, 65 calories. And then another program has rated it at like 70 calories. So it's going to be off by 5. And then you multiply that out by how many eggs you're eating, and you could be off by a fair bit. But that's just one of the limitations of using technology there. So next question here is, any guidance in terms of weight/rep progression? Yeah, I can tell you what I do. So when it comes to weight and rep progression, I always progress the reps before I progress the weight. And I literally do this in a very linear fashion. So for example, let's say you're doing something like a dumbbell bench press and you're doing it for 8 reps. The next time that exercise came up in the program, so like week 1, you did 8 reps. Then maybe in week 2, I would strive for 10 reps. And then in week 3, I would strive for 12 reps. And then in week 4, I would look at increasing my weight to whatever the next sort of increment was. Now, most dumbbells in a gym go up by 5 pounds. That's usually okay for stronger people, or like males usually are okay by going up by that 5 pound increment until they hit a point where they're getting pretty close to failure on that weight increment. But what you can do is I recommend people get those 2.5 pound like ankle weights. So in the example of the dumbbell bench press, you can actually strap those ankle weights onto your wrist, and now you're going up by 2.5 pounds rather than 5. So if you're benching like, say, 50-pound dumbbells and you can't get to the 55s, you can use those 2.5 pound weights just around your wrists, and that will get you just above and kind of right in between that 50 and 55 pound increment. So you can give that a shot. That it tends to work for us. You can also get weights that you can like stick to the side of the dumbbells as well. So same idea. Oops. Next question here is, for the warm-ups, there's a left stance toe touch. I'm assuming I do that on the right side as well. Or is that left side specific for injury reasons? Not necessarily injury reasons, but no, you wouldn't do it on the right side as well. When I program like a left stance toe touch or a left side only or a right side only exercise, it's because we're addressing some sort of imbalance. So sometimes the most balanced programs out there are actually an imbalanced program. So getting into that left stance toe touch probably means that the left side is a little bit tighter than the right side, or you have less mobility on the left side than the right side. So it's giving a chance for that left side to kind of catch up to the right side. And as a side note, I only program like one side only exercises in like flexibility or mobility exercises only, not so much in strength exercises. Like I wouldn't program a right side only bench press, for example. unless there's some sort of really extreme example of you needing to do that. But generally speaking, mobility and flexibility might be one side or the other, but usually it's both. So the next question here is a little bit long, so I'm just going to kind of read it out. This person's having problems with their left knee. They've got a little bit of front top knee pain, tight muscles, and doing more than my level of muscular fitness could handle, I guess. I had a bit of intermittent knee pain. Yesterday, they spent a few hours running up and down the stairs of their parents' house, helping them cooking and cleaning and whatnot. And then, yeah, suddenly their knee started to hurt a little bit, especially when the knee was bent. So, yeah, this is kind of a common kind of broad strokes approach to this. This is a common issue. So that anterior knee pain is definitely in this situation an overuse issue. So just taking a little bit of time off and resting will probably do it. The other thing to think about is when your knee starts to hurt, you want to look at the joints above and below it. So do you have enough ankle mobility to support your knee function? And do you have enough strength and mobility in your hips to support your knee? So your knee really only goes one direction, right? It's kind of like the hinge on a door. It goes back and forth. And so if it's trying to make up for some of the lack of mobility in the ankle or the hip, it tends to start shifting around. And then we put a lot of strain on some of the tendons and ligaments that are making up that knee and trying to keep it stable. So that's where a lot of that knee pain can come from. Now, typically, yeah, it just starts with pain, but can progress into like some swelling and that sort of thing. So first response is, yeah, just avoid whatever is hurting your knee. There's kind of the analogy of, if you slammed your hand, if you had an injured hand and I said, well, what happened to your hand? And you're like, well, I slammed it in the car door. Okay. So a good idea, or the first place I would start was, stop slamming your hand in the door, right? Don't continue to do that. Your hand's not going to get better. That's kind of like the dummy example. So yeah, you want to stop doing whatever is aggravating your knee. And if it hurts, then yeah, stop the exercise or avoid those exercises. And then you're going to want to work on your ankle mobility and your hip and hip strength and mobility as well. So there's just a little bit more in this question as well. Like it tends to hurt when they're sitting at their desk and that sort of thing. So it's really the same answer. You're going to want to work on your hip mobility, your ankle mobility, and kind of avoid whatever happens to be hurting. Oops. Whatever happens to be hurting your knee. All right, so my next question here is, so how do you improve conditioning for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? So that's a really good question. So most sports, when it comes to conditioning, involve sort of intermittent bursts of activity. And jiu-jitsu is one of those ones where it definitely falls into that category. If you've ever watched a jiu-jitsu match, there's, they usually start standing up and there's this sort of weird period of interaction. And then something happens, right? Somebody pulls guard or tries to get a takedown. There's basically a scramble and then a settle. So jiu-jitsu tends to progress from settles to scrambles. So you start settled as you're kind of figuring out where this match is going to start. Then somebody does something that creates a scramble, and then you settle. And then you scramble again, and you settle. And so I don't like it, like as a jiu-jitsu athlete myself, I don't like it when coaches call it an act of rest, because I mean, if you're taking those moments to rest, you're probably going to lose the match or lose the roll or whatever it is. You're going to get into a less advantaged spot. So I don't like calling it an act of rest, but it's sort of like that, where these settling positions are. You're figuring out kind of where the weight is, where your weight is, where your opponent's weight is, and how to progress to a better spot for you. And it's kind of interesting because, the average jiu-jitsu match is like between 6 to 8 minutes. So it's there's definitely an aerobic component to it. But like I said, there's all these sort of intermittent bursts of activity that happen. So there's also a lot of like anaerobic activity happening as well over the course of several minutes. So what I suggest when it comes to improving your conditioning is you want to look at 3 areas. Now, there's some really good science put out there by a guy named Joel Jamieson, who was responsible for Demetrius Johnson, former UFC flyweight champion, like one of the best fighters of all time. And he realized that what you need in jiu-jitsu is the ability to increase the rate at which your ATP fuels the muscle. So ATP is essentially the kind of, for sake of argument, we'll call it sort of the energy source of the muscle. So what happens is when you contract a muscle, you're using like 1 unit of ATP, right? So 1 maximal contraction. And then when that muscle is relaxing again and resting, your body goes into this process of trying to create another unit of ATP, and it fuels up, and then you're able to contract again. So the quicker that you can do that, the quicker that you have that response, the better conditioned you're going to be for something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So that's maybe not that helpful. But what I can do is kind of give you how I would lay out like week 1 of a conditioning program for a jiu-jitsu athlete. So when it comes to conditioning, the first thing to remember is that you don't have to kill yourself every day to improve your conditioning. In fact, I'm a big fan of implementing small incremental changes. For example, changing how you're breathing. For example, in your rest periods between sets, you might notice yourself doing a lot of mouth breathing, right? That's that kind of thing. You want to become aware of that and change that to nasal breathing. So it's in through the nose, out through the nose, or in through the nose, out through the mouth, one or the other. The other thing that you can do for something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is there's some interesting research in the last year about how difficult it is to be engaged in a mentally challenging activity while doing something physically active. So that would be like an example of that would be like running on the treadmill while trying to play chess. That will be extremely exhausting. And one of the things they found was that if you listened to a mentally stimulating like podcast or audiobook or something while you worked out, you would improve your conditioning over obviously like several weeks. So that's one thing that I do, but you can try giving that a chance. But here's what I would lay out for a conditioning program. So like I said, don't kill yourself every day in the gym. That's not going to help. But realize that there's a lot of value in using lower intensity exercises as well. So everything doesn't have to be kind of like, an all-out war. So there's essentially three areas or 3 methods that you want to look at when it comes to your conditioning. The first one being cardiac output. The second being a tempo interval method. And then high resistance interval method. So 3 methods there: cardiac, tempo, and high resistance. In the cardiac output method, this is where you're doing something like road sprints or running on a treadmill or biking, that sort of thing. And what we're trying to improve is your body's ability to supply muscles with oxygen. So we're just looking at oxygen supply in this method. What you want to do is try to keep your heart rate between like 130, 150, something like that, for a consecutive 30 to 40 minutes. And like I said, you can do this with things like swimming. You can do this with like an MMA guy might do shadow boxing. You can do this with like jumping rope if you're able to do that. But biking, jogging, swimming, those sort of things tend to be the most popular and the easiest to implement. The next one is this idea of tempo intervals. So this is to actually help you develop localized muscular endurance. Okay. So the key to this is not to go 100%. So you absolutely don't want to be flooring yourself, but rather you want to be working around like 70%. And you only want to be working for about 10 to 12 seconds, followed by like a full minute of rest. Okay. So it's a short burst followed by a long rest, right? And that's exactly what's happening in jiu-jitsu. You get these intermittent bursts that only last like 10 to 12 seconds, if even that long. And then there's that settling period, right? That settling period of, say, you know, in this example, we're going to do about a minute of settle. As you get better, we can reduce the amount of break that you're taking, but we're going to start with a 10 to 12 second burst of activity followed by a full minute of rest. You can do this with sprints, for example. So you're going to do a 10-second sprint, and then you're going to rest for a minute, then do a second 10-second sprint, and then rest for a minute. Even better would be to use various exercises. So something you could do would be sprint for 10 seconds, rest for a minute, do like maybe you can do kettlebell swings or sandbag cleans or something like that for 10 seconds, as many as you can do in 10 seconds, then rest for a minute. And then maybe you're doing the battle ropes for 10 seconds, then rest for a minute, and just cycle through those 3 exercises until you get to, you know, you want to go through that about 8 to 14 times, depending on your conditioning. But yeah, we'll start around 8 and try to build that up throughout the week to 14 intervals. The next method is the high resistance interval method, and this is going to develop endurance in the fast twitch muscle fibers. So this is that explosion, recover, explosion, recover, explosion, recover. So a little bit different than tempo, but sort of similar. We're actually working on the actual muscle fibers themselves rather than the overall recovery tempo. So for this, you're going to need only 5 seconds of high resistance and high intensity exercise, followed by a rest interval that brings the heart rate down. So in like, you're going to need to do some testing for this one, but let's say, you know, down to 130 beats per minute or a 60-second break. So if you don't know what your, you know, if you haven't figured out your heart rates and that kind of thing, then just go with the 60-second break. So like 5 seconds of really extreme high intense exercise, intensity exercise, and then followed by a 1-minute break. So this can be, this is really effective by like varying the incline on a treadmill, for example, or by adjusting the resistance on a bike. So I like to do this with those old-fashioned white bikes with the blue band around the tire. So I'll lower it down so I'm working at you know, something like 60%, or I have my heart rate monitor and I'm like, okay, I'm like 130. I'm going to maintain that. All right. So 1 minute goes by. My heart rate's still around 130. Now I just crank the thing. I'll do like 4 or 5 big turns on that thing. So it's really hard. I can barely move the pedals, but I'm going as fast as I can for 5 seconds. And then I crank it back down. Okay. And you'll want to do that for, probably less than 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, probably. Anyway, so that's sort of my high resistance interval activity. So I crank the treadmill up, really high incline, go as fast as I can, and then lower it down for like a whole minute. And then for 5 seconds, I'm going to increase that treadmill incline, go as hard as I can, and then lower it back down. All right. So now in order to do this, you're going to want to measure your heart rate. So you want to determine what your resting heart rate is, and you're going to want to have a look at what your heart rate variability is as well. And that's going to kind of figure out where you're going to land in this conditioning program. So for week 1, now, again, this is like week 1. This is, if somebody wanted to start this on Monday, this is what I'd have them do. Okay. And of course, you want to remember that you need to be patient. Typically, week 1 is a little bit easier. You know, every time I look at my clients, like rate of perceived exertion, week 1 of a new program, pretty easy. Week 2 is kind of easy, but maybe a little bit harder. But by week 3, they're like, this is really challenging. And then week 4 happens and they're like, holy smokes. And then they're ready for another week 1 again. So the new program resets. So be patient. It's going to build upon itself. But for week 1, now, if your resting heart rate is above 60, and your HRV, so your heart rate variability, is below 80, then here's what we're going to want to do. Day 1 is going to be cardiac output. So we're just looking at oxygen consumption, right? We're going to do 40 minutes of cardio, 40 to 60 if you're used to doing it, okay? Day 2, we're going to do another day of cardiac output. We're going to spend 30 to 40 minutes doing it. So not as long as the first day, but we're still doing a little bit more. And we're also going to have your high resistance interval method as well built into that. And we're going to do like 8 to 12 of those. So remember, that's where we're increasing that treadmill or cranking the resistance on the bike, going for 5 seconds, resting for a minute. So we're going to do 8 to 12 of those. Day 3, we're going to do tempo intervals, 8 to 12 reps. And then day 4, cardiac output again, 40 to 60 minutes. So your traditional cardio is going to be days 1, 2, and 4. Day 1, 40 to 60. Day 2, 30 to 40. Day 4, 40 to 60, right? Day 2, you're including high intensity, high resistance interval training for 8 to 12 reps. And then day 3, we're doing those tempo intervals of 8 to 12 reps. So that's kind of like a circuit on day 3. Now, if your resting heart rate is below 60 and your HRV, your heart rate variability, is above 80, a little bit different, okay? Day 1, we're going to do 40 minutes of cardiac output. And we're going to combine that with your high resistance interval, 15 to 20 reps, okay? Day 2, we're moving on to tempo intervals, 12 to 15 reps. And then day 3, we're doing high resistance intervals, 15 to 20 reps. Day 4, we're doing tempo intervals, 12 to 15 reps. So we're doing a lot less of that cardiac output. We're doubling up on the high resistance intervals, and we're doubling up on the tempo intervals. All right. So 2 options there. You're either in A or B. So your heart rate's either above 60 and or your heart rate variability is below 80. You're doing the first example there, spending more time on cardiac output. And then if it's below, your heart rate is below 60 and your HRV is above 80, then we're spending more time in the tempo intervals and high resistance stuff. All right. So that kind of sums up week 1 of conditioning for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. After week 2, I would change that up a little bit, but that would get you started. All right. And I think that's going to do it for me today. I know I've got some phone calls coming in. People are trying to get a hold of me. So I'm going to log off here. Just checking the comments here, just on Facebook. Yeah, Christina says that, yeah, she had some issues when she first went back to the gym as well. Totally makes sense. I mean, given the time that we're in, like, yeah. Anyway, I got to take off. I got a bunch of stuff to get to. We've got a bunch of interesting things happening today. So hope you enjoyed that. If you liked it, share it, do all that kind of stuff. and then give me some feedback as well. Let me know how you thought this went. All right. Thanks for watching. And you know what I didn't do? I didn't talk about my little announcement at the beginning. So if you're still around, so sorry, I was reading a text message. So my announcement is I'm actually setting up a text message, a separate phone line, so that you'll be able to text me basically at any time, and we'll sort of bring questions in that way. Basically, just setting up a text platform, sort of network and community where everybody can have access to me. So it's essentially like I wanted to set up a second business line for a long time. Finally doing that. So I'm going to have a dedicated phone number just for all of the sort of strength and conditioning stuff that I do, as well as animation and all that kind of stuff. So super excited to get that off the ground. You'll see that number kind of splashed out there throughout our social media platforms. And I really hope you engage with it, because I'm going to be putting on a lot of content and videos and all that kind of stuff for the people who join me there. It's going to be a really valuable experience, and it's going to get you kind of first in line for everything else that I have coming down the pipeline here. So again, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you could share this out or like the video as well, that would mean a lot to me. So thank you, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.